This demonstration is to show how to use the Twin Dragons low-carb pumpkin bread mix in order to make scones. Now, everyone loves a good cup of coffee and some iced tea, and the scones are a perfect way to complement those warm drinks, especially in the cold fall season. So what we did was we took the pumpkin bread mix and then just tweaked it very simply in order to make these wonderful, fluffy, slightly cakey, slightly dry scone with a perfect texture. Okay, so I am a very, very fast cook. Because you have twins, you don't have time, to do anything but cook fast. So my mom actually was a cook and a chef in restaurants growing up. And so I always learned from my mom as well. She's a very, very fast cook. She can put a meal on the table in 15, 20 minutes, So that's how I've always been. So whenever I do things, you'll see, like with a lot of my recipes, they're just super simple with the most bang for your buck in the end. Because otherwise it's too much effort. So with the pumpkin bread mix, I wanted to use that in order to make, and I'm pulling up my little handwritten notes here. I wanted to use the mix in order to be able to make, other things. So, one of my favorite things are pumpkin scones. And so I thought, okay, we've got the flavor, we've got the flour part of it, the mix. How do we get the texture, which I think is the most tricky part, of using that. So what I wound up doing is I just took a whole bag of mix, and this makes 12 scones, about the size that you all saw, so they're a good solid, scone about like that big, okay? So I take the whole thing, put it into the food processor, because of course, what's faster than a food processor, right? Here you go, and you want to take a really cold block of butter. And for me, what I usually do is I'll chop it into very, very small cubes. Okay, so for this stick of butter, I'll cut it into thirds lengthwise, and then I'll flip it to its side, and then I'll do a thirds again, and then I'll just cut it into tiny little cubes before I put it into the food processor. And then that, if you're making pie crust, it's the same process, as you want to be able to put it in tiny little bits. Otherwise, you're just, smashing the heck out of it, yeah. And if you, yeah. So this is, remember, it's fast. So so what I'll do is I'll just throw that into the food processor. Okay. And then pulse it just for a few seconds until it looks like coarse grains of sand. Okay, so that's about it. So you see all the butter, it's just tiny now? Okay, but it's not completely smooth. Okay, so that's where we want to keep it, because we want to keep little bits of butter in the dough as we're making the scones. So in a separate bowl, that's when I start putting the wet ingredients together. And it's 4 eggs. So instead of the ingredients on here, I've tweaked it, because remember, if you do it per this, it's going to come out like a soft bread or a muffin, or a cake. So, sorry, facial recognition, okay. So instead, I cut the eggs down to 2 instead of the 4, and I'll post this recipe as well, okay? So 2 eggs. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of cream. half of a can of pumpkin. Okay. Which, according to the recipe on the bag of the pumpkin mix, it says 3/4 of a cup, that you use, which comes out to be about a half a can. So my little trick is, if you look at the can, I use this one. This is organics. There's a little line right here. That's the half label mark. And so I usually scoop it out right until the line. And then that gives me half a can without having to measure. Sorry. Used to be a thumbprint, but here you go. Okay. So egg, pumpkin, yep. So I have this, and if you like it a little bit more mapley, then I'll add a little bit of maple extract to it as well, which isn't in the mix itself. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Usually I'll just add maybe about a teaspoon of maple extract. So you see it's sort of a thick, you see. So it's not quite watery, it's just a little thick. So once it's mixed, blended, okay, in there, I go back to here, throw that in. Okay. And then, sorry. Sort of like to cover it up a little bit so it doesn't get all sticky. And then again, you just pulse it. Just until it starts to come together. You see how it's beginning to come together? Right there. And that's about ready, okay? So you really don't want to overwork it. You can see right there. Okay, so it's thick. It's like a really thick peanut butter, yeah. Okay. So from there, let me see. Again, one of those little things that I do at home. I have a countertop like this. This is marble, but we have a granite one. And usually what I'll do is I'll wet it down just a little bit with a little wet paper towel. And then I put saran wrap down onto it. Because sometimes when you need things and then you try to have to transfer it to another thing, it's hard to pick it up and transfer. And so when I use the saran wrap this way, I can just pick it up from the saran wrap itself and not have to worry about messing up the shape of the scones. Okay. So there's two, it's usually wide enough. There you go. And then you just dump it out into two piles of equal amount. See, so it's a fairly thick mix, but not so thick that you could knead it. So you see how they're roughly about the same? Yeah. Okay. This is probably making you cringe, Keely-Ann. There you go. So then I cover it with saran wrap again. And then for this part, you really just want to shape it into little round circles about 3/4 of an inch high. And about, I'd say about 6 inches wide, 5 to 6 inches wide, okay, in diameter. So you don't really need to knead it or anything. It's just really at this point patting it into a circle, okay? There you go. And you take a baking sheet. This is a half sheet. I always line mine with parchment paper, just for easy cleanup. See how it just comes right up, and you don't have to worry about, messing up the shape. Okay. So then I just throw it down. Not real elegant, but I'll do the same for both. But at this point, usually what'll happen is cutting better. I cut it in half with a sharp knife. And then I cut it into thirds on each half, so 6 pieces basically. Okay, so 2 more cuts, straight through. And remember, they are it's a thicker dough, but it's still going to be fairly soft. Okay, and then I'll just use a spatula or something, and I'll separate them slightly so that they bake apart from each other. Okay. Here I'm just using a knife because I don't have a spatula on me. So you just be very gentle and then just separate them out. Like that. There you go. There you go. So you can see how they're just in the shape of the scone. And that's really all there is to it. I bake it for about 20 minutes on 350, and then they're ready. So if you want, you can, some people like them sugared, so at this point you can take Lakanto and you can sugar them on top before you bake them. Some people like them iced. And so I'll make a similar glaze like Patty's making for the cinnamon rolls, and then I'll ice them afterwards. The one that I had on this was I took some cream cheese, and I took a little bit of the pumpkin that I had left in the can, and then I added basically pumpkin spice seasoning. So nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves. The 4, if you don't have pumpkin spice seasoning. Okay.
Nothing sweet on that icing?
Oh, I'm sorry, and powdered Lakanto, yes. Thank you. I like them. You totally can. So that's the beauty of it, is you can make these, and at this stage, if you want, you can wrap them individually and then freeze them. And then every time you want a fresh scone, you just take them out and then bake them in the toaster oven for about 15-20 minutes, and then you can have a fresh scone. Or you can bake them and then wrap them, and then if you want to reheat them, then I would nuke them in the microwave for a few seconds, or just take them and then re-toast them as well, and then they'll come right back to just like you've just baked them. So they're all of these products, they freeze very, very well, even though there's no preservatives or anything in them. Yeah. So, And that is it for the pumpkin scones. So it's pretty simple. You know, I think we just tweaked the ingredients, the wet ingredients a little bit, and of course the process, because instead of using a melted butter, then you want the butter to be cold and ground into the mix itself, okay? Like you would for a pie crust. And that's it. So again, you know, I'll make about 12 scones, about that size. They'll puff slightly, and you know, and once they're baked, I like to actually sit them out to let them cool in the air. So unlike the chocolate cake mix where you want to cover them right away to keep a lot of that moisture in, with the scones I leave them out because I like them to have a little bit of a harder shell like a scone. So I'll literally leave them out on the counter to cool for a couple of hours before I put them away, 2 or 3 hours before I put them away. So without covering it or anything like that, you just want to let it cool like that. But you know, it's pretty simple. You know, I mean, when I made this yesterday just to test out, it took me all of 5 minutes of prep to put everything together and then stick it in the oven. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And then let's see how much longer we have on patties. About 3 minutes and 52 seconds. So as soon as that's done, I'll throw these in with the other cinnamon rolls, and then we'll have all kinds of desserts to eat. Okay. Learn more about our programs at Weightless4Life.com.